The spring wind cut through the snow-covered plain, carrying the cold scent of rain and damp earth. Thomas Carey walked along the path, holding 3-year-old Edgar in his arms and gripping the hand of 6-year-old Lily. Their farm by the bend of the creek looked lonely and worn against the gray horizon. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the road, barefoot, soaked, with a bag slung over her shoulder. Her steps were slow, as though each meter cost her effort. Thomas froze on the porch, watching her. The children stopped, pressing close to each other, sensing the tension. The woman paused at the edge of visibility, lifted her head, and their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Each movement felt detached from the world. The snow beneath their feet creaked, blending with the sound of melting water trickling from the barn roof. Thomas noticed how her fingers gripped the handle of her bag, and a shiver ran through her body, mixing with the chill of the wind. She took a cautious step forward, hesitant, as though listening for any sound on the plain to confirm that it was safe. The children didn't dare move, their breaths hanging in the air in clouds of steam. Thomas slowly descended from the porch, keeping his distance, feeling the ground soften under his boots from the thawing water. The woman, unhurried, continued moving forward, her dress clinging to her body, wet and heavy. Snowflakes, mixed with rain, fell on her shoulders and hair, but she didn't seem to notice the cold, focused on her goal, finding shelter. Thomas took another step toward her, and every sound of their movement seemed louder than usual, echoing across the empty plain. In the distance, the creek gurgled, its thin layer of ice cracking as water bubbled beneath it, a reminder of the spring that was slowly melting the snow. Thomas noticed how the woman slowed her pace, tilting her head slightly, her gaze shifted to the children. Lily, holding Edgar's hand, stepped back a little, but her eyes never left the woman. In that moment, there was no fear, only curiosity and cautious trust that was slowly beginning to form. The woman stopped a few meters from the trail, leaning against an old post, bent by time. The wind caught a strand of her hair, lifting it into the air, but she remained motionless, as though listening to something unseen. Thomas felt his heart tightened as he watched this strange, quiet figure that had appeared on his land. The children stood still, almost holding their breaths, and it seemed like each moment stretched on endlessly. The sky above them was heavy and leaden, dark clouds threatening rain. Light from the weak sun, breaking through the clouds, fell on the snow-covered ground, creating a faint glimmer, as if the world around them had frozen in anticipation. Thomas felt a strange mixture of unease and curiosity. This woman was a stranger, but there was something familiar in her eyes, something almost human, that touched his heart. Step by step, they moved closer to each other. Snowflakes melted on her skin, leaving cold drops on her cheek, and Thomas noticed how tired and worn she was. Her hands, trembling from the cold, gripped the bag so tightly that the fabric bent and wrinkled. The children, still holding on to each other, dared not speak, but their eyes showed a slight relief. She wasn't a threat. She set the bag down on the ground, and the sound of the fabric falling broke the silence, a reminder of reality. Thomas stepped closer, assessing the distance and deciding whether he could trust this strange woman who had appeared in the wind and snow. She took a step forward, almost on tiptoe, and stopped just so the children could see her face. It was pale and worn, but there was a determination and hidden strength in it. The wind grew stronger, blowing at them from all sides, and snowflakes, mixed with rain, hit their faces. Thomas, feeling the cold through his thick clothes, took another step closer. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world stopped. The plain, the cold wind, the wet earth, and the sound of the creek, all of it receded, leaving them in a strange silence where every sound mattered. The woman looked up at the house, then at the children, and Thomas understood that she wasn't just looking for shelter. She was searching for some semblance of safety in this harsh world. He took a careful step toward her, and the distance between them shrank. The children moved forward slightly, sensing the calm in their father's movements. Everything around them seemed suspended in anticipation. The plain, the sky, the wind, their hearts. For a moment, Thomas saw something more in her eyes than fatigue and fear, a tiny spark of hope, barely noticeable, but real. The snow continued to fall, mixing with the rain, creating a faint rustle. But now it didn't frighten him. It seemed to accompany the moment of their meeting. The woman took a step closer, brushing the edge of the path, and Thomas, still still holding the children, assessed her strength and fragility all at once. The plain stretched endlessly, the wind carrying the smell of wet earth and melting snow. But in this cold silence, a moment of human closeness appeared. Thomas felt the tension slowly fade, leaving room for cautious interest and quiet curiosity. The children, slightly calmer now, watched her with curiosity, and for the first time in a long while, a smile flickered across all their faces. The woman lowered her eyes to the bag, then looked up at the farm again. Thomas took another step toward her, a little closer, carefully so not to scare her. She stood there, barefoot, wet and tired, but in her stance was something unyielding. The wind whistled in their ears, snowflakes landing on her face and shoulders, but they remained still, as if testing each other. Slowly, with each step, the world around them seemed to shrink, leaving them, the two children and the strange woman on the path, against the backdrop of the wide, cold plain. Thomas knew that this meeting would change everything. He took one more step, and the cold, sharp wind seemed to whisper that there was no turning back now. The woman looked at the children, then at the house, and in her gaze Thomas saw a quiet promise: to stay alive, to stay close, to find a way to survive this day and the next, together. She bent down to pick up the bag, and at that moment Thomas took a decisive step forward, offering her the way to warmth, to shelter, to a small hope for a safe place amid the endless winds of the plain. The snowflakes continued to fall, mixing with the rain, and the plain became quiet again. But now there was new life within it, a new possibility, quietly cutting through the grayness of the cold morning. The woman whom Thomas had silently named Maggie cautiously stepped under the eaves of the old shed. Her soaked clothes clung heavily to her shoulders, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. Thomas pointed to a spot for her to settle, and she lowered herself carefully, clutching the bag tightly in her hands. The children watched her from a distance, a careful mixture of curiosity and fear in their eyes. She moved slowly through the house, setting her things down one by one, each motion deliberate and tentative, as if afraid to disturb an invisible order. The evening sky darkened, and the rain intensified. Every sound, the soft patter of raindrops on the roof, the creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, seemed to fill the space, making the house feel smaller, quieter, as though nature itself was holding its breath. Maggie glanced over at the children, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Lily flinched, as if ready to take a step forward, but hesitated, retreating back into the corner. Her little face was a mask of uncertainty, and Edgar clung to her side, his small hand tightly gripping her sleeve. The tension in the room was palpable, like the quiet before a storm. Every movement of Maggie's was measured, careful, as though she feared the unfamiliarity of this new place. This strange, transient home might shatter with a single wrong gesture. She sat with her back to the fire, the warmth of the flickering flame seeming to contrast sharply with the chill of her soaked clothes. And for a long moment, she simply sat there, unmoving. The children stayed where they were, not daring to approach any closer. Lily's eyes followed Maggie's every movement, while Edgar, still too young to fully understand the weight of the situation, watched his sister. The space between them and the woman felt vast, an invisible barrier created by the unfamiliarity of her presence, the silence that hung between them like a heavy cloud. The rain beat harder against the windows now, the steady rhythm creating a blanket of sound that drowned out everything else. It was the kind of rain that made the world feel smaller, more isolated. The wind howled outside, but inside, there was only the quiet, the flickering fire, and the faint sound of Maggie shifting in her seat, as though she too was waiting for something to happen. Time seemed to stretch in the stillness. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the children seemed to understand that the moment wasn't right for words. Not yet. They remained on the opposite side of the room, their small bodies tense and alert, as if waiting for a sign, any sign, that it was safe to draw closer, to bridge the distance between themselves and this strange, wet woman who had suddenly appeared in their home. Maggie reached up and wiped the wet strands of hair from her forehead, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't look at the children, but there was something in her posture, something in the way she seemed to curl in on herself, that spoke of exhaustion and quiet resignation. The weight of the journey she had endured was visible in the sag of her shoulders, the weariness in her eyes. Thomas stood by the doorway, his presence barely noticeable, but there nonetheless. He watched the woman and the children, gauging the distance between them, the tension that filled the air. He could feel the uncertainty settling in his own chest. He had invited her in, but how much of himself could he offer? How much trust could he extend to someone who had appeared out of the storm, a stranger, just as uncertain of him as he was of her? The rain continued to fall, heavier now, as though the world outside was being washed clean by the downpour. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath, suspended in time. Maggie's presence, once a silent intrusion, now seemed to fill the space, a quiet force that, despite its fragility, could not be ignored. She was here, and for better or worse, this moment, this uneasy beginning, was theirs to navigate. Lily took a step forward, almost without thinking. Her small feet shuffled on the wooden floor, the sound of it sharp in the stillness. But just as quickly, she stopped, pulling back as though the simple act of moving forward had become too much. Her eyes flicked toward Thomas, seeking reassurance, but he offered none. He knew the children needed to make their own judgments, to find their own way through the uncertainty. Maggie looked at Lily then, her gaze softening for a fraction of a second, before she turned away again. She didn't speak, didn't reach out, but in the brief exchange of glances, something passed between them. A silent acknowledgement. It was a fleeting connection, fragile, but it was enough to break the tension in the room, just a little. The fire crackled softly, the only sound that felt like a heartbeat in the room, but it was not enough to fully dispel the chill. The storm outside raged on, but here, inside, there was only the rain, the fire, and the weight of a new, uncertain beginning.
Several days passed. Maggie immersed herself in the daily rhythms of the household, scrubbing floors, sewing torn clothes, preparing meals with careful hands. Each task was done with a quiet diligence, every movement deliberate, as though she measured her presence against the fragile trust that had begun to grow in the children. She stepped softly into their lives, offering small gestures, a gentle smile, a careful wordless touch, a patience that seemed endless. Lily began to respond, revealing tiny secrets, the kind that only a child could entrust to someone who had proven gentle and safe. Edgar, following his sister's lead, mirrored her quiet movements, learning to trust the rhythm of the stranger who had entered their home. Thomas watched from a distance, noting the slow transformation of the woman who had arrived on their doorstep weary and cautious. She was becoming more than a visitor. She was a support, a quiet presence that filled gaps left by absence and loss. In her care, the children found small joys again, laughter that came softly in the evenings, shared in the warmth of the flickering firelight. The house, once hollow and echoing with memories, began to hum with a sense of belonging, fragile but tangible. Maggie moved through the rooms with measured grace, carrying out each chore not only with necessity, but with a subtle desire to weave herself into their lives. Yet the past she carried with her was never far. The town, distant but alive with whispers, carried rumors that drifted to the edges of their secluded life. Each trip into the market, each exchange with neighbors, became a test, an examination of her presence, of the assumptions that clung to her like a shadow. She moved among strangers with careful steps, aware of every glance, every muted judgment. Even as she became a part of this quiet household, the memory of pursuit, of suspicion, never fully faded. It lingered like a shadow along the edges of her consciousness, a constant reminder that safety was fragile and trust could be broken in an instant. Inside the home, a delicate harmony prevailed. Maggie's hands soothed the domestic space, her voice soft and steady when she moved between the rooms. She and the children shared quiet mornings and evenings filled with small rituals, like arranging flowers by the windowsill or brushing away the snow tracked in from the porch. Each day added to the sense of routine, each careful act a reinforcement of the fragile security they were building together. But the harmony was always tempered by an underlying tension. Every sound from beyond the door, the creak of a branch against the siding, the distant bark of a dog, reminded them that the world outside could intrude at any moment, carrying judgment, danger, or unwanted attention. Thomas felt the weight of this duality keenly. He saw how Maggie's gaze would flick to the windows, how her hands would tighten briefly at the edges of doors. He understood the vigilance required, the subtle balance of presence and caution. Her quiet strength, the endurance that had carried her through countless miles and sleepless nights, was what anchored the household now. It was her resilience that allowed the children to laugh softly, to share secrets in whispers, to feel protected in a world that remained unpredictable and vast. As days folded into one another, the shadows of Maggie's past became intertwined with the small joys of the present. The children's trust grew, tentative but genuine, and the sense of home solidified, even as the threat of intrusion loomed beyond the thin walls. Every meal prepared, every corner swept, every quiet smile exchanged in the soft glow of the evening fire reinforced the new life she was forging here. And yet, in the quiet moments alone, when the rain pattered softly against the windows and the wind swept across the plain, Maggie felt the persistent tug of what had been lost, of what could never be fully left behind. The past pressed against the walls like a shadow, ever present, reminding her that this fragile sanctuary required vigilance, patience, and unspoken courage.
The evening storm descended suddenly, dark clouds rolling across the horizon with a menacing weight. Thunder shattered the silence, each rumble vibrating through the ground and walls of the farmhouse. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the wide open plains in stark flashes of white. The wind howled, bending the trees and rattling the shutters, carrying with it the scent of rain and the electric tension of impending danger. Thomas moved quickly, gathering the children, their small hands clutching his tightly as the first sharp crack of firewood snapping reached their ears. Smoke rolled over the fields, heavy and acrid, searing the lungs with a sudden, choking force. The barn was engulfed in flames, the dry hay igniting almost instantly, sending tongues of fire leaping across wooden beams. Tools and equipment clattered to the ground, thrown by the heat and wind, each spark threatening to spread further. Maggie reacted without hesitation, her movements urgent and deliberate, pushing the children toward safety while ensuring the animals followed. The fire roared around them, the crackling and snapping of timber mingling with the roar of the storm. Every second stretched, charged with peril, each step demanding courage and precision, their survival dependent on split-second decisions and unwavering calm amidst chaos. Smoke stung eyes and choked lungs, forcing Thomas and Maggie to shield the children, their bodies close and protective. The heat licked at their faces, intense and merciless, yet neither faltered. They guided the frightened animals past the danger, calling softly through the roar of wind and flames, herding them toward the open ground. The barn shuddered ominously with every gust, threatening to collapse, beams cracking under the relentless fire. Their hearts pounded in sync, the rhythm of fear and determination driving them forward, each movement a blend of instinct and necessity. Every glance toward the burning structure reminded them of what was at stake, yet also reinforced the unity of their actions, binding them together in purpose.
As the flames consumed the barn, the storm continued to rage. Sheets of rain pelting the scorched earth and sending clouds of steam into the night air. Maggie's soaked hair clung to her face, strands plastered to her cheeks, while Thomas's boots sank into the mud, leaving tracks that quickly disappeared under the pounding rain. They moved as one, protective and careful. The children nestled against them, shivering yet safe in their arms. The night around them became a blur of orange light and deep shadows, punctuated by the violent staccato of thunder and the jagged lines of lightning, a fierce theater of danger and resilience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the fire began to subside, leaving behind a smoking ruin of charred wood and scattered hay. The storm still raged above, but a silence settled over the immediate chaos, a heavy, exhausted stillness. Thomas and Maggie stood side by side, holding the children close, their arms trembling from exertion, but firm in their embrace. They watched as the last embers glowed faintly, the night around them quieting, except for the distant rumble of thunder and the dripping of rain from eaves and branches. Their hearts gradually slowed, but the echo of fear and adrenaline lingered, binding them in a shared, wordless understanding. The children, wide-eyed and shivering, clung to them, drawing warmth from the steady presence of their guardians. Thomas and Maggie's hands occasionally brushed, a small, unspoken reassurance that they had faced the storm and survived together. The farm, soaked and scarred, lay under the relentless patter of rain, but within their small circle, a fragile sense of safety emerged, forged in the fire and chaos. Each breath was a reminder of what they had endured, and a promise of the quiet mornings to come. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the edge, yet also revealed the steadfast courage and unity that now held them together, hearts beating in the same rhythm amidst the endless night.
Life gradually settled into a fragile rhythm. The storm had passed, leaving behind wet earth, puddles reflecting the muted sunlight, and a lingering smell of smoke mixed with rain. Maggie moved through the house with purpose and care, her presence growing steadier each day. She cleaned floors until the wood gleamed, arranged rooms with a delicate attention that softened the rough edges of the farmhouse, and stitched torn clothes with nimble, precise fingers. The children began to notice the patterns in her work, the quiet rituals she performed each morning and evening, the care with which she prepared meals, and the small kindnesses that filled the spaces between chores. Her hands, once trembling with weariness, now moved with confidence and grace, a subtle assertion that this home was becoming hers as much as anyone else's. Lily, once shy and hesitant, began to speak in whispers, sharing secrets with Maggie that she would not have voiced to anyone else. Edgar, imitating his sister's cautious steps, followed the routines she introduced, learning small lessons in patience, kindness, and order. Laughter, soft at first and then more genuine, began to fill the corners of the house, carried on the warm scent of stew and fresh bread. Maggie's presence became a steady heartbeat for the household, a quiet rhythm that brought reassurance even in the shadow of the past. Thomas watched, cautious but slowly relaxing, noting the subtle changes, the children's faces brightening with trust, the softening of walls and hallways under her care, the air of calm that seemed to settle wherever she went. Days bled into weeks, and patterns formed naturally. Maggie introduced small new habits, sweeping the front porch to shake off the dirt and rain, arranging wildflowers picked from the nearby fields, teaching Lily how to tend a small vegetable patch, showing Edgar how to carry water without spilling it. Every act, no matter how mundane, became a building block of trust, a quiet proof that the house could be more than shelter, it could be a home. Thomas, once hesitant, now found relief in routine, in the predictability of tasks and the steady presence of Maggie. Together, they navigated small emergencies, shared meals, and settled into the rhythms that marked the changing seasons. Outside, the world remained observant, its eyes curious and sometimes wary. Yet within the farmhouse walls, the family began to feel the comfort of permanence. The children's laughter grew bolder, no longer stifled by caution. They ran barefoot across the wet floorboards, chased by the sound of Maggie's amused claps, and learned that safety could exist in moments of play. Thomas joined them when he could, his laughter mingling with theirs, a sound that had been absent for too long. Maggie's hands moved confidently now, comforting, cleaning, creating, guiding, and reassuring with every motion. Life in the farmhouse had become a delicate balance between the lingering threats of the past and the slow, steady blossoming of trust and belonging. Each day, the small victories compounded. Meals prepared, chores completed, laughter shared, quiet moments of connection discovered. The family was learning to exist not only in survival, but in quiet joy and careful acceptance. Maggie's presence had become indispensable, her role embedded in the fabric of daily life. Thomas observed how the children sought her guidance naturally, how their tentative trust had turned into reliance, how the house itself seemed warmer, fuller, and steadier with her in it. The past still whispered, a constant shadow at the edges of town and memory, but inside these walls, life moved forward with new habits, new rhythms, and a fragile but growing sense of stability.
The storm and fire had tested them, yet they emerged not only intact, but stronger, bound together by shared experiences and the subtle reassurance of consistent care. Each dawn brought another small victory, each evening the quiet satisfaction of a day endured and survived, together.
Summer had shifted into early autumn, and the days carried a gentle crispness, hinting at the coming change of seasons. Thomas and Maggie moved together across the farm, their hands busy with chores, but their movements in quiet harmony, as if the rhythm of the land had stitched them into a shared pattern of life. The children ran freely through the open fields, gathering wildflowers and tossing them into the air, their laughter echoing across the rolling plains, carrying a sense of freedom and joy that had been absent in past seasons. Maggie knelt to plant seeds in the small vegetable garden, her fingers pressing tenderly into the soil, each action a promise of growth and care. Alongside her, she arranged a patch of bright flowers, their vivid colors a symbol of hope and renewal, a small but profound reminder that new beginnings could flourish even after hardship. Thomas watched, feeling a warmth that had slowly returned to his heart, recognizing that Maggie's presence was not born of obligation, but of genuine love and commitment. She had become a cornerstone of their family, a quiet, steady force who nurtured not just the land, but the children's spirits as well. Lily ran to her side with a small bouquet, giggling as Maggie accepted it with a smile, while Edgar chased after a butterfly that had landed on a nearby fence post, his excitement uncontained. The house, once a simple refuge, now felt like the center of a living, breathing family, each corner echoing with laughter, small footsteps, and the hum of domestic life. Thomas noticed how the children's trust had grown naturally, how their small gestures of affection reflected the stability Maggie had brought into their world. The farm itself seemed to respond to their care. The fields, once empty and muted, now shimmered with the rich hues of autumn, the tall grasses swaying in the soft wind. The garden flourished under Maggie's careful tending, each plant a testament to the slow work of patience and dedication. In the kitchen, the scent of fresh bread and simmering vegetables mingled with the cool autumn air, drifting through open windows and inviting a sense of comfort that lingered long after each meal. Thomas and Maggie moved in quiet unison, their shared labor and laughter weaving the fabric of a life that had been tentative and fragile, now growing resilient and strong. As the sun began its descent, casting a golden glow across the fields, Thomas and Maggie paused to watch the children play. Their shadows stretched long and soft across the uneven ground, stretching toward the horizon as if reaching for the future itself. Each moment carried a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that the family they had built was rooted in more than necessity. It was founded on trust, care, and the gentle persistence of love. The wind whispered through the grasses, soft and warm, carrying with it the sense of earth and harvest, blending with the sound of children's laughter to form a melody of belonging and hope. Thomas felt the weight of the past ease slightly, replaced by the comforting knowledge that the present held stability, joy, and the quiet promise of tomorrow. Evening settled slowly over the farm, painting the landscape in amber and gold. The children ran to Maggie and Thomas, their small hands reaching for attention and affection, while the two adults stood together, watching the sky darken and stars begin to peek through the first hints of night. The home, the farm, and the wide open prairie had become a sanctuary, a place where roots could deepen and new traditions could grow. Every chore completed, every meal shared, and every moment of quiet reflection contributed to the foundation of this new life. Thomas realized that the past, with its storms and shadows, had receded far enough for them to live fully in the present, building each day with care, patience, and subtle love. As darkness gently enveloped the farm, the family gathered near the edge of the fields, lingering in the warm glow of the setting sun. The children's laughter faded into contented murmurs, and Thomas and Maggie stood close, hands brushing,
hearts aligned in quiet understanding. The prairie, vast and endless, stretched before them as a canvas of possibility, a place where family could grow, thrive, and endure. In the golden light of the final hour, Thomas felt a deep gratitude for the unexpected turn of life, for the woman who had chosen to stay, and for the children whose hearts had opened to her care. In this place, surrounded by the quiet beauty of land, sky, and family, hope had taken root, and love had found its home. For those following this journey of resilience, patience, and quiet devotion, subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales and continue witnessing the gentle unfolding of life on the frontier.